In the vast emptiness of space, where alien empires span thousands of star systems and species measure their age in millions of years, there exists one universal truth that every civilization learns. Humans are weak, primitive, and utterly insignificant. They're correct about this until they're not. When a hegemony's most feared military commander encounters a single human survivor on a dead world, he expects to add another trophy to his collection. What he doesn't expect is to become the hunted instead of the hunter. Because sometimes the most dangerous predator in the galaxy isn't the one with the biggest claws or the most advanced technology. It's the one with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. This is the story of how one man's rage became a legend that would echo across the stars, and how the hunters learned to fear the very prey they thought they'd already destroyed. The smoke still rose from New Terra's capital city 3 days after the bombardment ended. Marcus Chun crouched in the ruins of what had once been the University District, watching alien patrol craft sweep overhead like mechanical vultures. His left arm hung useless at his side, broken in 2 places when the library collapsed around him. Blood had dried on his face from a dozen cuts, and his military fatigues were torn and blackened with ash. He should have been dead, by all rights. He should have died with the rest of the 3rd Colonial Defense Regiment when the hegemony fleet arrived. 2 million humans lived on New Terra when the sun rose 3 days ago. Now, as far as Marcus knew, only one remained. The hegemony had been thorough. Their plasma bombardment had turned the major cities into glass craters. Their ground forces had swept through the rural areas with methodical precision, hunting down every survivor they could find. Marcus had watched from his hiding spot in the university's sub-basement as teams of Kralith shock troopers dragged family from their homes and executed them in the streets. The Kralith stood 8 feet tall on digitigrade legs, their reptilian faces dominated by predatory eyes and rows of razor-sharp teeth. They moved with the fluid grace of apex predators, and their energy weapons could punch through a foot of reinforced concrete. Each one was worth 10 human soldiers in combat, according to the tactical manuals. Marcus had killed 3 of them yesterday, not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. He'd killed them through patience, planning, and the kind of desperate cunning that only came from having absolutely nothing left to lose. The first one had died when Marcus dropped a 2-ton concrete slab on its head from the 3rd floor of a bombed-out apartment building. The second had walked into an improvised explosive device made from cleaning supplies and a dead soldier's plasma grenade. The third had simply made the mistake of investigating a noise in an alley where Marcus waited with a piece of rebar and 20 years of military training. Now the aliens were hunting for whoever had killed their scouts. Marcus could hear them calling to each other in their clicking, hissing language as they searched the ruins. They sounded angry. Good. Angry enemies made mistakes. Marcus checked his remaining supplies. 1 military ration pack, half a canteen of water, a combat knife with a chip blade, 6 bullets for the sidearm he'd taken from a dead officer. Not much to work with, but it would have to be enough. The sound of approaching footsteps made him freeze. Heavy, deliberate, nothing like the clicking gait of the Kralith. These boots rang against the rubble with the measured pace of someone important, someone who didn't need to worry about snipers or ambushes. Marcus eased himself deeper into the shadows of the collapsed wall and waited. The being that rounded the corner was like nothing he'd ever seen. It stood 7 feet tall, but moved with an almost human grace. Its skin was a deep blue-black color that seemed to absorb light, and its head was crowned with a crest of bone-like protrusions that marked it as royalty among its kind. The uniform it wore was magnificent, deep purple fabric with intricate gold threading that spoke of high rank and unlimited resources. This was a Vorthak, one of the hegemony's ruling caste. Marcus had only seen them in intelligence briefings, and those had been grainy surveillance photos taken from enormous distances. To see one here in person was both terrifying and enlightening. They were beautiful in the way that apex predators were beautiful. Every line of their body spoke of evolution perfected for dominance. Their large, dark eyes missed nothing as they surveyed the ruins. When this one spoke, its voice carried the absolute authority of someone who had never been disobeyed. "I know you are here, human." The words came out in perfect, unaccented English. "My sensors detected your thermal signature. My trackers found the blood trail from your kills. You fight well for such a primitive creature, but this ends now." Marcus remained perfectly still. His broken arm throbbed with each heartbeat, but he forced himself to ignore the pain. The Vorthak was testing him, try to provoke a reaction. It was a classic predator technique. Make the prey reveal itself through fear or anger. The alien continued its slow circuit of the ruined square, its boots crunching on broken glass. "You interest me, little human. Most of your species died screaming and begging for mercy. But you killed 3 of my Krolith. Cleverly, efficiently. You showed them what terror feels like before they died." A pause. Marcus could see the creature's breath misting in the cold air. New Terra's terraforming systems had failed when the power grid went down, and the temperature was dropping toward the planet's natural sub-zero baseline. "I am War Commander Vextalia of the 3rd Hegemony Fleet. I have conquered 47 worlds and eliminated 16 species. I have never encountered resistance from a lone survivor before. Usually, the remnants of broken civilizations simply break. But not you." The Vorthak stopped walking. Marcus realized with a chill that it was standing less than 10 feet from his hiding place. "I will make you an offer, human. Surrender yourself, and I will grant you a clean death. Continue this futile resistance, and I will ensure your end is slow and educational. You cannot hope to achieve anything meaningful with your primitive weapons and broken body. What do you say?" Marcus said nothing. He had learned long ago that sometimes the best answer was silence. Let the enemy fill the quiet with their own words and assumptions. People, even alien people, revealed more about themselves when they thought they were talking to a frightened audience. Vextalia laughed, a sound like crystal bells shattering. "Ah, you think to outlast me? To wait until I grow bored and leave? How wonderfully naive. I have time, human. My species lives for thousands of your years. I can afford to be patient." The War Commander resumed walking, but now its path was taking it closer to Marcus's position. "But perhaps you are thinking tactically. Perhaps you hope I will make an error, come too close, give you an opportunity to add my death to your collection. That would be ambitious." Marcus tightened his grip on the combat knife. If the alien found him, he'd go down fighting. Not because he thought he could win, but because dying on his feet was better than dying on his knees. "I've been wondering about something," Vextalia continued conversationally. "What drives a member of such a weak species to continue fighting when all hope is gone? Is it stupidity? Madness? Some primitive inability to recognize when you are defeated?" The alien paused again, this time directly in front of the gap in the wall where Marcus hid. For a moment, their eyes met across the shadows. Marcus saw intelligence there, and curiosity, and something that might have been respect. Or is it something else entirely? The War Commander mused. Something my people have forgotten in our rise to dominance. For several heartbeats, neither moved. Then Vextalia smiled, revealing teeth like polished obsidian. "How fascinating. I find myself genuinely curious about the answer. Very well, human. I will not hunt you today. Instead, I will give you a gift time. Use it wisely. Tomorrow, I will return with a full hunting party. If you can evade us for 7 of your days, I will consider this world sufficiently sanitized and move on to the next target." The alien began to turn away, then stopped. "Oh, and human, I suggest you find better weapons. The next encounter will not be so civilized." Marcus watched the War Commander walk away with the same unhurried pace. Only when the sound of its footsteps had faded completely did he allow himself to breathe normally again. 7 days. The alien was giving him 7 days to what? Die slowly instead of quickly? Run and hide like a wounded animal? No. Marcus had understood the subtext in that conversation. Vextalia wasn't offering him time to escape. The war commander was offering him time to become interesting. This wasn't mercy, it was entertainment. The Vort hack wanted to see what a human could accomplish when pushed to the absolute limit. Fine. If the alien wanted a show, Marcus would give it one. He began moving through the ruins with purpose now, heading for the military depot on the city's outskirts. The hegemony forces had bombed it, but they hadn't bothered to secure it. Why would they? What could one broken human do with whatever scraps remained? Marcus smiled grimly as he picked his way through the debris. The aliens were about to find out exactly what a human could do when they had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The hunt was about to begin, but they made one critical error in their calculations. They assumed they would be the hunters. The military depot was a crater, just as Marcus had expected. But military engineers planned for disasters, and the really important supplies were always kept in hardened underground bunkers. It took him 4 hours of careful excavation to find the access hatch, and another hour to crack the security locks with tools improvised from the wreckage. Inside, he found exactly what he'd hoped for. Weapons, ammunition, medical supplies, rations that would last months, and, most importantly, detailed intelligence files on every known hegemony species and their equipment. Marcus spent the rest of the day reading and planning. By the time the alien sun set on the ruins of his world, he had the beginnings of an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. Probably both. The hegemony had made this personal when they exterminated his world. They thought they were dealing with a primitive species that would roll over and die when faced with superior force. They were about to learn why humanity had fought its way to the top of the food chain on Earth, and why some lessons had to be taught in blood. War Commander Vextalia wanted to see what a human could accomplish in 7 days. Marcus was going to show her that 7 days was more than enough time to turn the hunter into the hunted. Day 2 dawned cold and gray over the ruins of New Terra. Marcus had spent the night in the bunker, using the medical supplies to splint his broken arm and treat his other injuries. The pain medications helped, but more importantly, they cleared his head enough to think strategically instead of just reacting to immediate threats. He'd been busy during those long hours of darkness. The intelligence files painted a detailed picture of his enemies, their capabilities, and their weaknesses. Every species had them, blind spots that evolution or culture or simple arrogance had created. The trick was finding those weaknesses and exploiting them before the enemy realized what was happening. The Kraloth, for instance, were apex predators from a world with a 28-hour day cycle. Their reaction times and alertness dropped significantly during what their biology considered night hours, which, conveniently, corresponded to New Terra's late afternoon. Their energy weapons were devastating, but required a 30-second recharge cycle between maximum power shots. And their pack hunting instincts made them vulnerable to divide and conquer tactics. The Vort hack were even more interesting. They were an ancient species that had ruled the hegemony for millennia, but that dominance had come at a cost. They had become obsessed with honor, ritual, and personal combat. A Vort hack would accept a formal challenge to single combat, even when tactically disadvantageous, because refusing would damage their standing among their peers. Marcus had no intention of challenging anyone to honorable single combat. Honor was a luxury he couldn't afford, but he could use their obsession with personal glory against them. He packed carefully for the day ahead. Explosives from the depot's demolition supplies. Electronic components that could be jury-rigged into timing devices or remote detonators. Medical stimulants that would keep him functional even with serious injuries. And, most importantly, a long-range communications array that still had power in its backup batteries. The communications array was the key to everything. Because Marcus wasn't planning to just survive the next 7 days. He was planning to send a message that would echo across the galaxy. His first target was a Kraloth patrol that had established a regular route through the industrial district. Marcus had observed them yesterday while hiding in the depot, noting their timing, their formation, and their casual assumption that nothing on this dead world could threaten them. They were about to learn otherwise. Marcus positioned himself in the ruins of a chemical processing plant, 3 stories up with clear sight lines in all directions. The building's structural damage made it look unstable and dangerous, exactly the kind of place the aliens would assume was too risky to investigate thoroughly. The patrol consisted of 4 Krolith and a single Vorthack officer. Standard formation, standard timing, standard arrogance. They moved through the streets like they owned them, which they did, technically. But ownership was a temporary condition. Marcus waited until they were directly below his position, then triggered the first explosive charge. The blast brought down a section of wall that blocked the street behind them, cutting off their retreat. Before the aliens could react, the second charge detonated in front of them, sealing the other end of the narrow street. Now, they were trapped in a kill zone with limited cover and nowhere to run. The Krolith responded exactly as their training dictated. They spread out, sought cover, and began laying down suppressive fire while their officer coordinated their movements. It was textbook counter-ambush procedure, and it would have been devastatingly effective against conventional attackers. Marcus wasn't conventional. Instead of returning fire from his elevated position, he triggered the third charge. This one was directly below the aliens, hidden in the old sewer system that ran under the street. The shaped explosive punched a hole through the pavement and sent chunks of concrete flying in all directions. 2 of the Krolith went down immediately, their armor cracked by debris. The third took a piece of rebar through the shoulder and was effectively out of the fight. The Vorthack officer was thrown clear, but landed hard, his ceremonial weapon skittering away across the rubble. Marcus was already moving, rappelling down the back of the building on an improvised rope made from electrical cable. By the time the aliens recovered their senses, he was behind them, armed with a hegemony energy rifle he'd taken from yesterday's kills. The wounded Krolith tried to turn and fire, but Marcus put 3 shots center mass before it could complete the motion. The creature's natural armor was impressive, but energy weapons fired at point-blank range punched through it like paper. The Vorthack officer rolled behind a chunk of concrete and shouted something in his own language, probably calling for backup. Marcus triggered the 4th and final charge. The electromagnetic pulse device he'd improvised from the depot's electronics fried every piece of hegemony technology within a 50-meter radius. The aliens' weapons died. Their communications went silent. Even their advanced armor systems shut down, leaving them no better protected than if they were wearing decorative clothing. The street fell silent except for the groaning of damaged buildings and the labored breathing of the surviving Krolith. Marcus stepped out from behind his cover, the captured energy rifle trained on the Vorthack officer. Up close, he could see that this one was younger than War Commander Vextalia, with less ornate armor and a face that still showed surprise instead of calculating intelligence. "Your Subcommander Kethvar," Marcus said, reading the alien's rank insignia. He'd memorized the entire hegemony military hierarchy during his night of study. 3rd in command of the occupation force. The Vorthack's large eyes narrowed. "How do you know our language, human? What do you know my name?" "I know a lot of things." Marcus kept the rifle steady. "I know your force consists of 237 Krolith troops, 18 Vorthack officers, and a command ship in low orbit with a crew of 43. I know you're here to strip mine this world's rare Earth deposits after you've finished the genocide. I know your next target is the Kepler colony, 3 systems over." Kethvar hissed, a sound of genuine alarm. "Impossible. That intelligence is classified at the highest levels. I also know," Marcus continued, stepping closer, "that you've never lost a single soldier to indigenous resistance before. Not in 47 conquered worlds. Your species has become soft, overconfident. You expect other races to break and run when faced with superior force." The alien's hand moved toward a backup weapon, but stopped when Marcus shifted his aim to center on the Vorthack's chest. "Here's what's going to happen, Subcommander. You're going to carry a message back to War Commander Vextalia. Are you listening?" Kethvar nodded slowly. "Tell her that her 7-day hunt just became something much more interesting. Tell her that I'm not running from her anymore. As of right now, I'm hunting her. And tell her that before this is over, every species in the hegemony will know that humans don't break as easily as she thinks. Marcus backed away, keeping the rifle trained on the alien. You have 10 minutes to carry that message. After that, I start hunting your people in earnest. And, Sub-Commander, you might want to mention that I know exactly where your command ship keeps its life support systems. The Vorthax's face went pale beneath its blue-black skin. You cannot reach our ship. It is in orbit, heavily shielded, defended by outdated security protocols that assume planetary populations don't have access to military-grade equipment. Marcus finished. Your intelligence gathering is as sloppy as your tactical planning. He triggered a small explosive charge on the far side of the trap street, blowing a hole through the debris wall large enough for the aliens to escape through. 10 minutes, Sub-Commander. Don't waste them. Kethvar grabbed the wounded Krolith and, half-carried, half-dragged the creature toward the opening. Marcus watched them go, then began moving toward his next position. The real work was about to begin. Marcus made his way through the ruins toward the city's old broadcasting station. The facility had been bombed, but, like most critical infrastructure, it had redundant systems and hardened backups. More importantly, it had the most powerful communications array on the planet, strong enough to punch a signal through the hegemony's orbital jamming and reach the nearest human colony. It took him 3 hours to reach the station and another 2 to restore partial power to the communication systems. The equipment was damaged, but functional, and Marcus had enough technical training to jury-rig a solution from spare parts and pure determination. As he worked, he could hear the sounds of increased alien activity in the distance. Patrol craft were flying search patterns over the city. Ground forces were moving in larger groups, their previous casual confidence replaced by alert wariness. Good. Confidence was dangerous. Alert enemies made fewer mistakes, but they also burned more energy and resources, and they were easier to predict. Marcus finished the last connection and activated the communications array. The signal was weak and would only last a few minutes before the aliens triangulated its position and destroyed the transmitter, but a few minutes was all he needed. This is Colonel Marcus Chun of the 3rd Colonial Defense Regiment. He broadcast on the emergency frequency used by all human settlements. New Terra has fallen to hegemony forces. Population eliminated except for myself. I am currently engaged in asymmetric warfare against occupation forces. He paused, checking his instruments. The signal was getting through but barely, and he could already hear aircraft approaching. To any human settlements receiving this transmission, the hegemony considers us extinct. They underestimate our tactical capabilities and assume we will break under pressure. They are wrong. I am transmitting detailed intelligence on hegemony force composition, equipment specifications, and tactical doctrine on Subchannel 7. Use this information to prepare your defenses. The aircraft were getting closer. Marcus started the automated upload of the intelligence files he compiled. To the hegemony forces monitoring this frequency, you wanted to see what a human could accomplish when pushed to the limit. You're about to find out. This world is now a free fire zone. Every day you remain here, you will lose soldiers. Every night you sleep, you will wonder if you'll wake up. Every mission you undertake, you will question whether you're the hunter or the hunted. The upload completed just as the first energy blast began hitting the broadcasting station. Marcus was already moving, using an escape route he'd prepared earlier. Behind him, the station erupted in flames and twisted metal. But the message was sent. Across the galaxy, human settlements were receiving detailed intelligence on their enemies for the first time. More importantly, they were hearing that somewhere out here, one of their own was still fighting back. Marcus smiled grimly as he made his way toward his next target. The hegemony had started this war by exterminating his people. He was going to finish it by teaching them that some prey was too dangerous to hunt. War Commander Vextalia wanted to see what a human could accomplish in 7 days. By the time those 7 days were over, she was going to wish she'd never asked the question. The hunt had begun in earnest, but the roles of predator and prey were about to become very, very unclear. Day 4 brought an unexpected change to the ruins of New Terra. Where before the hegemony forces had moved with casual arrogance, they now advanced with careful precision. Patrol sizes had doubled. Aircraft swept overhead in coordinated patterns. The aliens had stopped treating this as a cleanup operation and started treating it as an actual war. Marcus observed the changes from his new base of operations, a network of connected tunnels beneath the old subway system. The underground transit network had been abandoned years ago when the city switched to hover transport, but the tunnels remained, providing him with concealed movement routes and perfect staging areas for his increasingly audacious attacks. His war against the hegemony had claimed 17 alien lives in 2 days. More importantly, it had forced them to completely restructure their occupation strategy. Resources that should have been dedicated to strip mining operations were instead being used to hunt for one human with a grudge and an alarming talent for improvised warfare. But Marcus knew that body count and tactical disruption weren't enough. If he wanted to send a message that would echo across the galaxy, he needed to do something that would shatter the hegemony's image of invincibility. He needed to kill War Commander Vextalia herself. The challenge wasn't finding her. The Vorthack's ego and sense of honor made her predictable. She'd established her command post in the ruins of New Terra's government building, partly for the symbolic value and partly because the building's reinforced construction provided excellent defensive positions. She also made regular tours of her force's positions, showing herself to her troops to maintain morale. The challenge was getting close enough to strike without being overwhelmed by her guards. Marcus had been working on that problem for the past day and night, using intelligence gathered from captured equipment and careful observation of alien movement patterns. The solution, when it came to him, was elegantly simple and completely insane. He was going to walk through the front door. Not literally, of course, but the principle was sound. The best way to infiltrate a heavily guarded position wasn't to sneak around the defenses. It was to make the defenders open the door and invite you in. Marcus spent the morning preparing. First, he visited one of his equipment caches and retrieved a hegemony energy rifle and a set of Kraloth armor he'd salvaged from previous encounters. The armor didn't fit properly. It had been designed for a creature 8 feet tall with a completely different body structure, but creative use of padding and strapping made it wearable. More importantly, it would pass casual inspection at a distance. Next, he needed a prisoner. The opportunity presented itself around midday, when a 2-member hegemony patrol ventured too close to one of Marcus's prepared ambush sites. The pair consisted of a young Vorthack officer and a single Kraloth bodyguard, both moving with a heightened alertness that had become standard since Marcus began his campaign. Marcus triggered the sonic disruptor he'd improvised from subway public address equipment. The device produced a frequency that interfered with hegemony nervous systems, causing disorientation and nausea without permanent damage. Both aliens stumbled, their coordination destroyed by the invisible assault. The Kraloth went down first, its predatory reflexes no match for a sensory attack it couldn't understand or counter. The Vorthack lasted longer, trying to fight through the effects, but eventually collapsed to its knees. Marcus emerged from concealment wearing the modified Kraloth armor and carrying the energy rifle. To the disoriented Vorthack, he would look like a hegemony soldier arriving to provide assistance. "Officer down," Marcus said in the Vorthack's own language, his pronunciation carefully practiced, requesting immediate medical support at command post. The alien officer tried to focus on Marcus's face, but the sonic disruptor was still running, making coherent thought nearly impossible. What happened to us?" "Unknown weapon," Marcus replied, helping the Vorthack to its feet. "Possible human technology. War Commander Vextalia requires immediate debrief." It was exactly what the alien officer would expect to hear. Mysterious human technology. Urgent command attention. The kind of crisis that demanded immediate action without careful thought. Marcus half-carried the Vorthack toward the government building, playing the role of a concerned soldier helping a wounded superior. The sonic disruptor's effects would wear off in about 20 minutes, but that would be long enough. The government building's defenses were impressive. Energy barriers at the main entrance. Guard posts covering all approaches. Sensor arrays that could detect hidden weapons or explosives. But none of those defenses were designed to stop someone who appeared to be bringing in a wounded officer for medical attention. Marcus guided the still disoriented Vorthack through the checkpoint, responding to guards' questions with terse military efficiency. Medical emergency. Possible exposure to unknown human weapon. War commander's immediate attention required. The guards waved them through without hesitation. In their experience, humans were primitive creatures with crude technology. If one of their officers had been injured by some kind of exotic weapon, it was exactly the sort of thing their commander would want to investigate personally. Marcus navigated the building's corridors from memory, using floor plans he'd studied during his intelligence preparation. The command center was on the 3rd floor, behind multiple layers of security, but accessible to someone with the right credentials, or someone accompanying a wounded officer. As they climbed the stairs, the Vorthack began to recover. "Wait," it said, its voice growing stronger. "I don't recognize you." "What unit are you?" Marcus shifted his grip on the alien's arm, applying pressure to a nerve cluster he'd identified in the anatomy files. The Vorthack went limp, unconscious but alive. He'd need the officer awake for the final phase of his plan, but not just yet. The command center's entrance was guarded by 2 Krolith in full combat armor. Marcus approached them with the unconscious Vorthack slung over his shoulder. "Emergency medical situation," he announced. "Officer exposed to human chemical weapon. War Commander Vextalia must be informed immediately." The guards hesitated. The unconscious officer was obviously in distress, and chemical weapons were exactly the sort of nasty surprise they'd been warned about. But something about the situation felt wrong. The designation, the soldier, one of them demanded. Marcus had been ready for this question. "Hunter Prime Kethzar, Advanced Reconnaissance. I was with the patrol when the attack occurred." It was a name he'd taken from the unit rosters and captured equipment, belonging to a Krolith who'd been killed in Marcus's first attack. The guards wouldn't know the soldier was dead unless they checked recent casualty reports. "Wait here," the guard said, turning toward the command center's communication panel. Marcus couldn't afford to wait. In 30 seconds, the guard would discover that Hunter Prime Kethzar was listed as deceased, and his cover would be blown. Time for the final gambit. He triggered the small explosive charge he'd hidden in the Vorthack officer's equipment belt. The blast wasn't large, barely enough to knock the guards off balance and fill the corridor with smoke. But it was perfectly timed and positioned to look like the officer's equipment had malfunctioned catastrophically. "Chemical weapon," Marcus shouted, his voice muffled by the Krolith armor's communication system. "Secondary exposure. The building may be contaminated." Panic was contagious, especially when it involved unknown weapons and invisible threats. The guards' training told them to secure the area and verify the threat, but their instincts told them to get away from whatever had just exploded. Marcus pressed his advantage. "I must get the officer to the war commander immediately. She needs to authorize evacuation protocols before the contamination spreads." The guards stepped aside, their desire to avoid responsibility for a potential chemical attack overriding their security procedures. Marcus carried the unconscious Vorthack into the command center, his heart hammering with adrenaline and the absolute certainty that he was about to either accomplish something magnificent or die in a spectacularly stupid fashion. War Commander Vextalia stood at the center of the command center, her attention focused on a holographic display showing troop movements across the city. She was even more impressive in person than she had been during their first encounter. Tall, elegant, radiating the kind of absolute confidence that came from a lifetime of unquestioned victory. She turned as Marcus entered, her large dark eyes taking in the scene with predatory intelligence. "What is the meaning of this disruption?" she demanded. Marcus set the unconscious officer down and stepped back, his hand moving to the energy rifle slung across his back. Around the command center, a dozen hegemony officers and technicians watched with varying degrees of alarm and confusion. War Commander, Marcus said, pulling off the Kraloth helmet and revealing his human face, I believe you wanted to see what a human could accomplish in 7 days. The command center erupted in chaos. Officers reached for weapons. Technicians scrambled for alarm switches. Guards who had just realized their error came running through the entrance. But Vextalia raised one elegant hand, and the chaos stopped as if a switch had been thrown. Fascinating, she said, her voice calm and almost admiring. You walked into my command center carrying one of my own officers as a prop. You convinced my guards that you belonged here. You turned their own security procedures against them. She stepped closer, and Marcus could see the intelligence burning in her eyes like cold fire. You are either the most resourceful member of your species, or your people are far more dangerous than we realized. Which is it, Colonel Marcus Chun? Marcus smiled, his hand still resting on his rifle. Why don't you call off this invasion and find out? Vextalia laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Oh, I think not. But I will offer you something else. Single combat. You and I, here and now. If you win, my forces will withdraw from this system. If I win, well, your species' reputation for resilience will die with you. Around the command center, the other hegemony officers muttered in their various languages. This was unprecedented. War commanders didn't engage in personal combat with primitive aliens. It was beneath their dignity. But Marcus understood what was really happening. Vextalia wasn't offering him single combat out of honor or respect. She was offering it because she was genuinely curious about what he would do, and because, in her arrogance, she couldn't conceive of actually losing to a human. Interesting proposal, Marcus said, but I have a counteroffer. He reached into his armor and pulled out a small device that looked like a standard hegemony communication unit. Several of the guards tensed, but Vextalia gestured for them to remain calm. This, Marcus explained, is a dead man switch connected to every explosive charge I've planted throughout this city over the past 4 days. Enough firepower to level 6 city blocks, including this building. If my heart stops beating, if I'm knocked unconscious, or if I simply release the trigger, the charges detonate. The command center fell absolutely silent. Now, Marcus continued conversationally, let's discuss the terms of your withdrawal from human space. Because, War Commander, you're about to learn that sometimes the prey has bigger teeth than the predator. The silence in the command center stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. War Commander Vextalia stared at Marcus with an expression that was equal parts admiration and calculation, while her officers stood frozen between their desire to act and their fear of triggering a catastrophic explosion. Marcus kept his breathing steady and his grip firm on the dead man's switch. The device was real. He'd spent most of the previous night wiring enough explosives throughout the government building to turn it into a crater. But the charges in the rest of the city were a bluff. He'd used most of his remaining explosives on this building, betting everything on this one confrontation. It was a risky gambit, but Marcus had learned that sometimes the most effective weapon wasn't the one you actually used. It was the one your enemy believed you might use. You interest me more and more, human, Vextalia said finally. Most species, when cornered, either fight desperately or beg for mercy. You do neither. Instead, you turn the situation into a negotiation where everyone dies if you don't get what you want. It's called mutually assured destruction, Marcus replied. My species invented the concept back when we were still fighting each other with nuclear weapons. The theory is simple. If everyone loses when someone attacks, then rational actors won't attack. But that assumes all actors are rational, the War Commander pointed out. What if I'm simply curious enough about your species to accept the destruction of my command staff as an acceptable price for that knowledge? Marcus smiled grimly. Then, you'd be making the same mistake you've been making since this started. You keep assuming that humans think the way your species thinks. We don't. He took a step forward, and several guards tensed visibly. The motion reminded everyone in the room that one human with a trigger device held all their lives in his hands. You said you've conquered 47 worlds and eliminated 16 species. Congratulations. But has any of those species ever killed themselves just to take you with them? Because that's exactly what I'm prepared to do. The truth was more complicated than that. Marcus had no desire to die, but he'd accepted the possibility when he started this mission. More importantly, he'd studied enough Vortex psychology to know that their species couldn't truly comprehend the concept of spite-driven suicide. They were too logical, too concerned with personal survival and advancement. It was a weakness he intended to exploit. Vextalia circled him slowly, her movements fluid and predatory. You're bluffing. You have no intention of dying here. Your species' survival instinct is too strong. Maybe, Marcus agreed. But are you willing to bet your life on that assumption? Because if you're wrong, the hegemony loses not just a war commander, but also their entire command structure for this sector. That would be embarrassing when your superiors asked for an explanation. The alien commander stopped circling. Marcus had found another weakness. Vortex culture placed enormous emphasis on personal achievement and avoiding failure that could damage one's reputation. The thought of being remembered as the commander who lost an entire fleet to one primitive human clearly disturbed her. What do you want? She asked bluntly. Simple. Your forces withdraw from this system immediately. You report to your superiors that humanity is too dangerous to be worth conquering. And you never come back. Impossible. The hegemony doesn't negotiate with lesser species. Then, I guess we all die together, Marcus said cheerfully. I'm fine with that. My species is already extinct according to your records. What's one more casualty? He watched Vextalia's expression carefully, looking for the telltale signs of psychological pressure. The Vortex were predators, but they were also survivors. When faced with a no-win scenario, their instincts would eventually push them towards self-preservation over pride. There is another option, she said slowly. Personal combat. If you defeat me in single combat, I will order the withdrawal. If I defeat you, your species accepts its extinction gracefully. Marcus pretended to consider the offer. What kind of single combat? I assume you're not proposing a fist fight. Traditional Vortex honor combat. Energy blades. No automat. First to draw blood wins. It was exactly what Marcus had hoped she would propose. Energy blade combat was a Vortex specialty, requiring speed, agility, and reflexes that his species couldn't match. In a fair fight, he'd lose in seconds. But Marcus had no intention of fighting fair. Acceptable, he said, but I have conditions. The combat takes place here, in this room, in front of your entire command staff. When I win, they witness your surrender order. And the dead man switch stays active until I'm safely off this planet. Vextalia's eyes narrowed. You're very confident for someone about to face a superior opponent. I've been facing superior opponents my entire life, Marcus replied. It's taught me that the key to winning isn't being stronger or faster. It's being smarter and more willing to do whatever it takes. The war commander gestured to one of her officers, who brought forward a case containing 2 energy blades. The weapons were beautiful in their deadliness. Handles of polished metal topped with focused energy fields that could cut through nearly any material. Marcus accepted one of the blades and tested its weight. It was lighter than he'd expected, designed for the Vortex's longer reach and different muscle structure. He'd have to compensate for the difference in his fighting style. Last chance to surrender, human, Vextalia said, activating her own blade with a soft hum of contained energy. I've been trained in combat since childhood. I have killed members of dozens of different species. You cannot hope to match my skill. Probably not, Marcus agreed, backing into the center of the room and settling into a defensive stance. But I don't need to match your skill. I just need to be more desperate than you are. The duel began without ceremony. Vextalia moved like liquid lightning, her blade weaving patterns of deadly light as she tested Marcus's defenses. Her technique was flawless. Centuries of genetic optimization and cultural training had produced a perfect warrior. Marcus gave ground immediately, barely managing to block her initial strikes. The alien's reach advantage was even more pronounced than he'd anticipated, and her speed was inhuman. Within seconds, he was driven back against the command center's main display screen, desperately parrying attacks that came too fast to properly counter. It was exactly where he wanted to be. Marcus triggered the first of his hidden advantages, a small electromagnetic pulse device he'd concealed in his sleeve. The pulse disrupted the command center's electronics for just a fraction of a second, but that was enough to kill the lights and plunge the room into temporary darkness. In that moment of confusion, Marcus rolled sideways and came up behind one of the command consoles. Vextalia's enhanced vision adapted to the darkness faster than human sight could, but Marcus had planned for that too. He triggered the second device, a flashbang grenade modified to produce a burst of light specifically calibrated to overload Vorthack visual systems. The alien commander staggered, temporarily blinded by the brilliant flare. Marcus pressed his attack, not with the energy blade, but with a combat knife he'd hidden in his boot. The blade scraped along Vextalia's arm, drawing a thin line of dark blood before she could recover and leap backward. First blood, Marcus announced, breathing hard. I win. The command center erupted in outraged protest from the hegemony officers. This wasn't how honor combat was supposed to work. The human had cheated, used trickery, violated the sacred traditions of warrior culture. But Vextalia raised her hand for silence, and gradually the protest died away. She looked down at the cut on her arm, then at Marcus, then at the knife in his hand. Fascinating, she said quietly. You never intended to fight me with the energy blade at all. The entire duel was a distraction while you maneuvered into position for a different kind of attack. That's right, Marcus confirmed. You assumed I would try to beat you at your own game, using your rules and your weapons. Instead, I changed the game entirely. The war commander deactivated her energy blade and set it aside. You realize that this victory changes nothing? My officers will never accept a withdrawal order based on what they consider a dishonest victory. They will brand me a failure and replace me with someone who will continue the invasion. Marcus smiled. No, they won't. Because you're about to explain to them exactly why humanity is too dangerous for the hegemony to conquer. Am I? Think about it, War Commander. I'm one human. One. I have no advanced technology, no superior weapons, no alien allies. I've been broken, outnumbered, and completely outgunned from the beginning. And despite all of that, I infiltrated your command center, held your entire senior staff hostage, and defeated you in personal combat. Marcus gestured around the room at the watching alien officers. Now imagine what an entire planet of humans could accomplish if they had time to prepare. Imagine what 100 human worlds could do. Imagine trying to occupy a galaxy full of people who think like I think and fight like I fight. The implications of his words sank in slowly. The hegemony had built their empire by conquering species that fought conventionally. Armies against armies, fleets against fleets, honor against honor. They'd never faced an entire species that embraced asymmetric warfare, that turned their enemies' strengths against them, that refused to play by any rules except their own. Your tactics are effective against us, Vextalia admitted slowly, but they are also dishonorable. Surely not all of your species would stoop to such methods. War Commander, Marcus said gently, you just watch me walk into your most secure facility wearing the armor of your dead soldiers. I used your own officer as a prop in my deception. I turned your honor codes against you and defeated you with weapons you never saw coming. And I did all of this while carrying enough explosives to destroy everyone in this room. He paused to let that sink in. I'm not an exception among humans. I'm not some special forces operator or elite warrior. I'm a middle-aged colonial defense officer with a broken arm and a bad attitude. If this is what one ordinary human can do to your forces, What do you think would happen if you invaded a world where millions of humans had months to prepare? The silence in the command center was different now. It wasn't the tense quiet of impending violence, but the thoughtful quiet of people who were beginning to understand that they had seriously underestimated their enemy. War Commander Vextalia looked around the room at her officers, then back at Marcus. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Signal the fleet. All hegemony forces will withdraw from this system immediately. Mark human space as interdicted. No further expansion in their direction without direct authorization from the High Command. War Commander, one of her officers protested. Surely you don't intend to. I intend, Vextalia said coldly, to ensure that the hegemony doesn't make the mistake of fighting an entire species of individuals like Colonel Chin here. Because if we did, we would lose. Badly. Marcus kept the dead man's switch steady in his hand, but inside he felt a surge of triumph that he carefully kept off his face. The bluff was working. The aliens were actually going to withdraw. But he wasn't done yet. There was one more message he needed to send, one final lesson to ensure that the hegemony would never again consider humanity easy prey. War Commander, he said quietly, there's one more thing you need to understand about my species. Vextalia looked at him expectantly. Everything I did here, the infiltration, the explosives, the tactical deception, I made it all up as I went along. Humans don't just think outside the box. We pretend the box doesn't exist. He smiled then, an expression of pure human stubbornness and pride. You underestimated one man with nothing to lose. Don't make the mistake of underestimating what my species can do when we have everything to fight for. 3 months after the hegemony withdrawal from New Terra, Marcus Chin stood in the rebuilt communication center of Kepler Colony, watching the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled prepare for departure. 200 ships stretched across the orbital space above the colony world. Everything from massive dreadnoughts to tiny scout vessels, all bearing the unified Earth Defense Force insignia that had become the symbol of human resistance. The transformation had been remarkable. Marcus's broadcast from the ruins of New Terra hadn't just warned other human colonies about the hegemony threat. It had provided them with detailed intelligence about alien technology, tactics, and weaknesses. More importantly, it had given them something they'd never had before, proof that humans could fight back and win. The fleet reports ready for departure. Admiral, came the voice of Fleet Captain Sarah Rodriguez, commander of the flagship U.S. Defiance. The title still felt strange to Marcus. 3 months ago, he'd been a broken colonel hiding in the rubble of his dead world. Now he was the commanding officer of humanity's first interstellar military force. Thank you, Captain, Marcus replied into his comm unit. Signal all ships. We jump to the Arcturus system in 10 minutes. Arcturus was a hegemony mining operation, heavily defended but strategically vital to their expansion into this galactic sector. Intelligence suggested it was lightly held, with most forces concentrated on more established worlds. It would be humanity's first offensive operation against alien targets, and the outcome would determine whether the species that had once been dismissed as primitive could truly stand as equals among the stars. Marcus reviewed the tactical data one more time. The human fleet was outnumbered 3-1, but they had advantages the hegemony didn't expect. Human ship design had evolved to prioritize speed and maneuverability over heavy armor. Human tactics emphasized coordination and adaptability over rigid formation fighting. And, most importantly, human crews had been trained in the same kind of asymmetric thinking that had allowed one man to hold an entire alien command structure hostage. Sir, came another voice from the communication station. We're receiving a priority transmission from Earth. It's marked for your personal attention. Marcus accepted the transmission, and the weathered face of Admiral Catherine Wells appeared on his screen. Wells was the highest-ranking officer in the Earth Defense Force, and her support had been crucial in convincing the colonial governments to unite under a single military command. Marcus, she said without preamble, I wanted you to hear this directly from me. The hegemony has made contact. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. What kind of contact? Diplomatic. They've requested formal negotiations through neutral intermediaries. Apparently, your little performance on New Terra has caused quite a stir in their high command. They want to discuss territorial boundaries and non-aggression protocols. They want to negotiate, Marcus said slowly, instead of simply conquering us. That's right. For the first time in their recorded history, the hegemony is treating another species as potential equals rather than subjects or threats to be eliminated. Marcus considered the implications. 3 months ago, humanity had been on the verge of extinction, dismissed by the galaxy's dominant power as primitive and inconsequential. Now that same power was offering to negotiate rather than fight. What's Earth's position? He asked. Cautious optimism, Wells replied. The Council wants to explore diplomatic solutions before committing to a full-scale war. But they also want to negotiate from a position of strength. That's where your mission comes in. Marcus nodded. You want us to hit Arcturus hard enough to make the hegemony take our military capabilities seriously. Exactly. Show them that humanity isn't just capable of desperate last stands and clever tactics. Show them we can project force across interstellar distances and threaten their strategic assets. The transmission ended, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd started this war as one man, trying to survive long enough to send a message. Now he was commanding humanity's first strike force, tasked with proving that his species deserve a place at the galactic table. All ships report ready for jump, Captain Rodriguez announced. Fleet is standing by for your command. Marcus activated the fleet-wide communication channel. 200 ships and nearly 50,000 human personnel were waiting for his words. This is Admiral Chun. 3 months ago, the hegemony believed they had eliminated our species. They saw us as weak, primitive, unworthy of consideration. Today, we prove them wrong. Today, we show the galaxy that humanity doesn't ask for respect. We take it. He paused, looking out at the assembled fleet. Each ship represented years of human engineering, innovation, and determination. Each crew member was a volunteer who had chosen to risk everything for their species' future. We're not fighting for conquest or domination. We're fighting for recognition, for the right to exist as equals among the stars. For the future of every human child who will grow up in a galaxy where our species is feared, respected, and left alone. The fleet began to move, ships aligning themselves for the jump to hyperspace. Marcus felt the familiar sensation of anticipation that preceded every major operation, the mixture of fear and excitement that came from knowing that everything was about to change. Today, the hegemony learns that there are consequences for underestimating humanity. Today, they learn that some prey has bigger teeth than the predator. The fleet jumped. The battle for Arcturus lasted 18 hours and redefined everything the galaxy thought it knew about human military capabilities. Instead of engaging the hegemony fleet in traditional formation combat, the human ships broke into dozens of small groups that attacked from multiple vectors simultaneously. Instead of trying to match alien firepower with superior technology, they used speed and coordination to isolate individual enemy ships and destroy them through concentrated fire. Most importantly, they fought with a level of tactical unpredictability that the hegemony had never encountered. Human commanders made decisions that violated every principle of conventional space warfare, deliberately exposing their ships to enemy fire to create tactical opportunities, sacrificing individual vessels to achieve strategic objectives, and adapting their battle plans in real time based on changing conditions. The hegemony fleet fought bravely and competently, but they fought according to principles and doctrines that had been refined over thousands of years of galactic warfare. They expected their opponents to behave rationally, to prioritize preservation of forces over aggressive action, to fight for territory rather than symbolic victory. Marcus's fleet had different priorities entirely. They weren't trying to capture Arcturus. They were trying to send a message. And that message was written in the wreckage of alien warships and the tactical reports that would soon reach every hegemony command center in the galaxy. When the battle ended, the human fleet controlled the space around Arcturus. The mining facilities on the planet's surface were intact but abandoned. The hegemony garrison had withdrawn in good order rather than face destruction, taking their valuable equipment and personnel with them. It was a victory, but more importantly, it was a demonstration. Humanity had projected military force across dozens of light years, defeated a numerically superior enemy, and achieved their strategic objectives with minimal losses. They had proven that Marcus Chen's performance on New Terra wasn't a fluke. It was a representative sample of what his entire species could accomplish when properly motivated. The diplomatic consequences were immediate. Within days of the Arcturus battle, formal negotiations began between humanity and the hegemony. The talks were conducted through neutral alien intermediaries and covered everything from territorial boundaries to trade protocols to mutual defense agreements. Marcus didn't participate directly in the negotiations. That was work for diplomats and politicians. But his presence at the talks was itself a form of communication. The galaxy's newest military power was represented by the same man who had single-handedly held an alien command center hostage and forced a superior enemy to withdraw rather than face the consequences of underestimating human determination. The final agreement established humanity as a recognized interstellar power with protected territorial boundaries and the right to unrestricted expansion within specified galactic sectors. More importantly, it included provisions for mutual cooperation in scientific research and resource development, effectively making humans junior partners in galactic civilization rather than subjects or enemies. But perhaps the most significant outcome was less tangible. Throughout the galaxy, other species had watched the rapid rise of humanity from near extinction to galactic recognition. They had seen what one determined human could accomplish against impossible odds, and what an entire species could do when united by shared purpose. The story spread through alien communication networks, growing and evolving with each telling. The tale of the human who had infiltrated a hegemony command center. The species that fought with weapons their enemies couldn't predict or counter. The military force that had appeared from nowhere and defeated one of the galaxy's most powerful empires through sheer audacity and tactical innovation. Marcus learned about his growing reputation through intelligence reports and diplomatic communications. To the galaxy at large, he had become something approaching a mythological figure, the human who had taught the hegemony to fear, the soldier who had turned certain extinction into improbable victory, the symbol of his species' refusal to accept defeat under any circumstances. It was, he reflected, probably an exaggerated version of the truth. But exaggeration was often more useful than accuracy when it came to building a reputation that would deter future aggression. 5 years after the Battle of Arcturus, Admiral Marcus Chun stood on the observation deck of humanity's newest space station, watching ships from a dozen different species arrive for the first Galactic Defense Symposium. The gathering was humanity's idea, a forum for sharing tactical innovations and coordinating responses to emerging threats in the galaxy's outer rim. The irony wasn't lost on him. The species that had once been dismissed as primitive was now hosting conferences on military strategy and galactic security. Human tactical innovations were being studied and adopted by civilizations that had been conquering worlds when Earth was still a molten ball of rock. Admiral, came the voice of his aide, Commander Lisa Park. The Vorthack delegation has arrived. War Commander Vextalia is requesting a private meeting. Marcus smiled. He'd wondered when she would make contact. The two of them had maintained an indirect correspondence over the years, professional communications about military matters and galactic security issues. But they had never met face-to-face since that day in the ruins of New Terra. Schedule the meeting for this evening, he said. Private quarters, informal setting. Vextalia arrived precisely on time, as Marcus had expected. She wore civilian clothing rather than military dress, and she moved with the same fluid grace he remembered. But there was something different about her, a thoughtfulness that hadn't been there during their first encounters. War Commander, Marcus said, offering her a seat in his private office. Or should I say, Admiral? I understand you've been promoted since our last meeting. Admiral will suffice, she replied, settling into the offered chair. Though I suspect we're meeting as colleagues now rather than enemies. Indeed we are. Though I have to admit, I never expected to be hosting hegemony officers at a conference on galactic defense. Vextalia laughed, the sound less harsh than Marcus remembered. Nor did I expect to be seeking tactical advice from a human who once held my entire command staff at sword point. The galaxy has become a far stranger place since our first encounter. They talked for hours, discussing everything from fleet tactics to interspecies diplomacy to the changing nature of galactic politics. Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying the conversation. Vextalia was intelligent, insightful, and surprisingly willing to acknowledge the mistakes her people had made in their initial assessment of humanity. I have often wondered, she said as the evening drew to a close, what would have happened if I had accepted your surrender that first day in the ruins? If I had simply killed you cleanly instead of offering you those 7 days? Marcus considered the question seriously. Honestly, probably nothing. I would have died, New Terra would have been stripped of resources, and your forces would have moved on to the next target. Humanity might have survived a little longer, but we would never have united the way we did. We would never have proven ourselves capable of fighting back. So in a sense, Vextalia mused, my arrogance and curiosity gave your species the opportunity it needed to claim its place among the stars. In a sense, yes. Though I prefer to think of it as humanity making the most of an opportunity that could have gone either way. The Vorthack Admiral stood to leave, then paused at the door. Marcus, if I may use your personal name, I want you to know that our encounter changed more than just interspecies relations. It changed how my people think about warfare, about strength, about the assumptions we make about our enemies. I'm glad to hear it, Marcus replied. Because underestimating your opponents is a luxury that no military force can afford for long. After she left, Marcus remained in his office, looking out at the stars and thinking about the strange paths that had led him here. 5 years ago, he had been a single human survivor hiding in the ruins of his world, driven by grief and rage and the desperate need to strike back at his enemies. Now he was the commander of one of the galaxy's most respected military forces, a key figure in interstellar diplomacy, and, according to the news reports, something approaching a living legend. The transformation seemed impossible when he considered it objectively. But then, impossible transformations were something of a human specialty. Marcus activated his personal communication system and recorded a message for transmission to Earth. It was something he did every year on this date. A report to the families of the people who had died on New Terra, telling them that their sacrifice had not been forgotten and that humanity's place among the stars remained secure. This year, he had something new to add to the message. The galaxy has learned to respect us, he said to the recording device. Not because we're the strongest or the most advanced, but because we're the most determined. Because when faced with extinction, we chose to fight. When offered surrender, we chose defiance. When underestimated, we chose to prove our enemies wrong. He paused, thinking of the faces of the people he'd known on New Terra, the colleagues, and friends who had died in the initial bombardment. The hegemony once believed that humanity could be dismissed as primitive and weak. They learned otherwise. And now, every species in the galaxy knows that there are consequences for underestimating the prey. There are consequences for assuming that because someone is smaller or less advanced, they're also less dangerous. Marcus ended the recording and transmitted it to Earth. Tomorrow, he would return to his duties as Admiral of the Human Defense Force. He would attend more conferences, review more tactical reports, and continue the work of ensuring that humanity's place among the stars remained secure. But tonight, he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The boy who had grown up dreaming of the stars had lived to see his species claim its place among them. The soldier who had fought for his world had lived to see that fight transform his entire civilization. And the man who had once been underestimated by an entire galactic empire had lived to see that empire acknowledge humanity as equals among the stars. The hunt that had begun in the ruins of New Terra was over. Humanity was no longer prey to be hunted or subjects to be conquered. They were predators in their own right, respected and feared throughout the galaxy. Marcus Chun had kept his promise to the war commander who had underestimated him alone. She had learned exactly what a human could accomplish when pushed to the limit. The galaxy would never make that mistake again.